Okay, I'm going to start. Good morning to everyone out there, and welcome to the thesis defense of Lorna Pagán Mattos, who has translated excerpts from ¿Por qué lloran las ciudades?, a novel by Elisa Levi. I would like to extend my gratitude to our readers, Professors Maritza Stanchich and Aurora Lauzardo Ugarte, for participating in this defense process. What we will do now is we will hand over the floor to Lorna so that she can give us her presentation, and after that we will have our discussion between the among the readers. Well, also including Lorna, of course. Okay, Lorna, if you'd like to begin, please.
Yes, can everyone hear me fine? All right, thank you. Good morning. I would like to start, I would like to thank both my readers, Professors Lauzardo and Stanchich, for agreeing to be my readers, and also Professor Auerbach, my advisor, for her guidance and patience during this entire process. All right, so I'm going to start my PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So for my thesis, I decided to translate 5 chapters of the novel ¿Por qué lloran las ciudades? By Elisa Levi. I translated the title as Why Cities Weep. Okay, so so just to give a short summary, ¿Por qué lloran las ciudades? Or Why Cities Weep follows the story of Ada, a Spanish woman who lives in Denmark with her girlfriend. And one day she receives a call telling her that her best friend Dennis has died by suicide. And he has left her, he has named her the executor of his will, and has made her his universal heir. And she must now travel to Japan to deal with the legal issues and every other aspect of his life. And now she travels to Japan, where she must learn to accept his death. And we go around on her journey. We go along on her journey until at some point she starts accepting what happened, even though she continues to wonder why. She has issues. Of course, we follow her through her feelings of grief, of guilt, because she has survivor's guilt. And now some of the themes include mental illness, suicide, grief, homophobia, and otherness. Now, her narrative style is, she writes in first-person point of view and follows a stream of consciousness style. She speaks or thinks in different times in very short sentences and in the present tense. And something else that occurs throughout the novel is that there is a lot of intertextuality from the very beginning of the story down to the end. A little bit about Elisa Levi. She was born in Madrid in 1994. She is a poet, novelist, and playwright. She studied audiovisual communication and performing arts and theater arts. She actually wrote a play that opened in Madrid in 2017. She has a poetry anthology and 2 novels, including ¿Por qué lloran las ciudades? Okay, so the value of the text. I thought that this novel was worth translating for many reasons. One of them is that she discusses topics that are very relevant to our current culture, not just in the Americas, but around the world, especially in this era of globalization. She does not shy away from controversial topics. And I thought, as someone who lives with mental illness, I thought that her representation of mental illness, mental health stigma, for example, were quite realistic. She also talks about suicide stigma and substance abuse. She also speaks about LGBTQA plus issues and the queer experience through her own experience and Dennis's experience. And she speaks about homophobia, which we can see especially through her mother, who decides to pretend that Dennis doesn't exist after she finds out that he's gay. The other issue that she talks about is otherness. And otherness not just in terms of her being a foreigner in Japan, but her being the other as a woman, as a gay woman, and as someone who has mental illness, and also as the other in her own family, because she is someone who is different from everyone. Her family sometimes seems to pretend that she isn't there, or that she is simply too different to be part of the family. And when I think about why I chose the text personally, all of these issues are a part of that. As I mentioned earlier, I live with mental illness, and her realistic representation of that made me feel seen, which is not something that you find very commonly in books. I actually found this book while going through a list of books that spoke about both mental health and mental illness and LGBTQIA plus issues. And I thought it was interesting. It was about suicide. I read it and I loved it. And ever since I read it, ever since I finished it, I thought I want to translate this. And I was very lucky that my advisor agreed to allow me to translate it. Okay, so some of the translation challenges I encountered were words that are not commonly used in Puerto Rico. And that includes some words that would be considered obscene in Puerto Rico in regular conversation. Also, words that have meanings that are important in the text, but that will lose their meaning if when translated. Also, cinematographic terms. The main character, Ala, feels that she's being followed around, filmed by a camera, and she uses a lot of cinematographic terms, and there is a lot of intertextuality, which is what I would like to focus on now. Okay, the novel, the main character in the novel makes reference to several books, films, poetry, and the one book that she speaks the most about is Hiroshima Mon Amour. And we can see that from, well, I'm going to say a movie and screenplay, because in the book she's reading the screenplay. And she actually starts at the very beginning talking a little bit about that, in the sense that she is reading the screenplay. So she mentions it there, and she makes, let's say, short or rather mild adaptations of different points of the story in her own narrative. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about Hiroshima Mon Amour, the screenplay was written by Marguerite Duras, and her writing was actually associated with the Nouveau Roman, movement that occurred between the 50s and 60s. The movie was actually a post-war movie, supposed to be about, I'm not going to say about peace, but about the period after World War II, with a focus on peace. And therefore, we're talking about World War II and the bomb in Hiroshima. And as we follow the main character, who is never, if I remember correctly, she does not, neither she nor the Japanese man that she gets together with, we never know their names. The style of the movie, in many ways, the sentences are very short, it's very introspective, and it's kind of poetic. Like, you could take the dialogue and it would look a lot like the poetry that Ada in the book actually writes. And then, of course, we are talking about otherness because she is a European woman in a country where she does not speak its language or understand its culture, just like Ada, like it occurs to Ada in the novel. Another movie that she refers to several times is Babel. It's she actually feels a lot in common, that she has a lot in common with a character that is Japanese, Chieko. She is a girl who is deaf, and her mother has died. And it turns out that her mother died by suicide. And Ada refers to her in many ways because of the isolation that she feels being there in Japan, totally alone, without Dennis. And also Ada feels that she has lost a parent because she and her mother cannot connect in any way. And then the other one that she mentions is Lost in Translation. This is at the very beginning of I think in the first 2 or 3 sentences of the novel. She mentions Lost in Translation and compares what is happening to her standing at the Shibuya crossing, that she feels like Scarlett Johansson standing at the Shibuya crossing in Lost in Translation. And again, we can see the themes of loneliness, isolation, the desire or desperation to connect to other people, which Ada also has. And of course, otherness as foreigners in this different world. Now, I would like to highlight some of the challenges that I found in the text. This one, rather than being a translation issue, it had to do with the title of the poem. The first, on the left part of the column, or excuse me, on the left column, you're going to find the original Spanish section of the poem, and the novel attributes this to the title Eros es más. So when I was searching for the poem, I was focusing on the title and I could not find it. I tried looking for parts of the part of the poem that I have, but also have trouble finding it. And it wasn't until I actually found the version that I own of Eros es más, which is the name of the short anthology by Juan Antonio González Iglesias. It wasn't until I found that book that I understood that it had been mistitled. So the actual title of the poem is Excess of Life, in Spanish, Exceso de Vida. So the book I found is bilingual. It has Spanish on one side and English on the other side. So it ended up being very useful in more than one way. Okay, and here I have a part that was very challenging. She actually writes a quote by Pasolini. No importa si como un rey la quise. And I believe that this is her own translation. I was not able to find this combination of words together anyway. But the problem is that she mentioned Pasolini and mentioned nothing else. So I started searching for it. And I ended up actually writing, I am not fluent in Italian, but I decided to get the translation for king, and I believe the word voluta. And I started searching those words with Pasolini, and eventually I found the original poem. And after that, the challenge was finding a translation to English and to Spanish. I actually found a Spanish translation from Guillermo Fernandez. It was published by UNAM. And from that one, then I looked for English translations, because in some places it was translated to beautiful banners and the beautiful flags. So I believe I found one more translation aside from these two at the end of the table. And I actually ended up choosing Norman McAfee's translation because it was the closest to Elisa Levi's. I thought it was the closest in style, and also the way it was written. And then here we have this one. This translation was also a little bit challenging, quite a bit challenging, because she refers to Japanese customs several times throughout the novel, because she is in Japan. And at one point, she and Dennis's roommate, who she also refers to as El Chico Rubio, the blonde guy, they sit down, and she mentions, nos sentamos en los cojines del salón, en el suelo, porque aquí la vida se hace en el suelo, de la tierra venimos y en tierra nos convertimos. Now, traditionally, this line would be translated as ashes to ashes, dust to dust, which appears in the Book of Common Prayer. But I needed a translation that would in some way or in every way follow what she was saying. We're talking about the floor. And so I looked for different versions, and here I only have 2 versions, but I read several. The part of the Book of Common Prayer, Ashes to Ashes, is actually from Genesis 3:19. And so I looked at several translations of that part in English. And then I also realized that there is a similar section, in Ecclesiastes, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly. There are some lines that are very similar, and I couldn't really find anything that really fit. But this last one from the contemporary English version of the Holy Bible, I found in Ecclesiastes, we are made from earth and we return to earth, which I thought was very similar and actually has a very similar meaning. And that would be all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lorna. There's so much there, and I want to, thank you so much for presenting this novel. I knew nothing about this novel before, and I thought it was so fascinating, dealing with so many different things. And as you pointed out, you know, from a translator's vantage point, the whole idea of intertextuality and even metatext and the idea of versions of things. You know, you could have so many different fascinating discussions, you know, based on this. So I haven't read the entire novel, but I plan to. And in any event, let's go on to the readers and so that we can get some feedback about your thesis, both the preface and the translation. Maritza, since you're a guest, would you mind beginning?
I don't mind beginning. I often also comment or converse with other people's comments. It's interesting. I really, first of all, you know, Lorna, I'm glad to start my semester with this, and I enjoyed it very much. I also was not familiar with this text. I think that the reasons that you chose this text are of primary importance today. And I mean, always have been, but I think today, I just want to kind of maybe highlight that today's generation of students at UPR and of younger people on social media around these topics are a major liberatory force in all of our lives. I hope I'm not sounding like I'm overstating things. Stigma and silence around mental illness and mental health is all of us who are older, like I'm 58, have been, you know, kind of suppressed, you know, all our lives around these matters. Probably most people, considering how common and unspoken these realities are for people personally or in their families or in their close relationships. So I thought it was a really good reason, really timely reason. As David just suggested, your presentation ending on this question of intertextuality and the challenges of finding translations and hunting down these particular works in themselves are a study. Like I don't know the work, but I'm familiar with some of the, of course, works that you were dealing with here. You presented them visually very well in your presentation. I really liked. I've been to, even though I'm not in the translation program, I've been to quite a few defenses, and I really like the way you presented the side-by-side translation. I haven't seen that before, and I really like how you presented that visually in the defense, and it added a lot actually to what you wrote, the written preface form. I mean, the presentations often do add a lot to the preface, but I know that the translator's note is very important, and that particular visual for me really like added a lot to the problems you were trying to convey. So one of the things that's so rich about this is with some of these references, of course, the whole question of translation comes up, since it's so obvious with some of the works that are presented, like Lost in Translation. And I even thought of I personally went off on a personal reverie about the work of Pasolini. So also the kind of the way the whole oeuvre or lives of some of the intertextuality work really kind of I don't know how to put this, change the writing style of the author, which is very simple in this kind of Hemingway-esque, straightforward, almost staccato style. But when you say you treat all these authors and references as embedded links, say you do that, say they all become embedded links, and you hit the embedded link in the text, then the text is kind of made much more complex than it might seem on the. Yes.
Hypertext.
Exactly. Because in your translation note, you say, even though I chose, like you said, at first I was afraid that this was too simple a text to choose for my thesis. You say that, and thanks to my advisor, David Auerbach, I was encouraged to do so. Actually, it's not, right? I think just this issue alone really shows how complex it is. And so the writing style is deceptively simple. It's very contemporary. It probably has succeeded, if you've learned about her work, in reaching a large audience, or maybe a large contemporary audience, or maybe a broader audience than, people who might prefer very turgid novels and prose. And yet at the same time, it's not simple at all, not in its themes, but also not in what you focused on in terms of this intertextuality. I was familiar a little bit with some of Pasolini's translations because I know the translator Norman McAfee. So I don't know if some of your description of hunting down, the Spanish or the English or both, I think was really interesting and rich. I didn't have too many questions or comments. I usually return the text to the student, and I can still do that, but I don't actually have a lot of like written comments in the text. A question that I was left with that I thought might be worth thinking about a little more was the kind of raised and unanswered. It doesn't have to be answered conclusively, but I thought it was worth maybe thinking about the curiosity about why the dogs' names were translated. In italics. And I liked that you wrestled with translating the dogs' names. And you raised the question that they were italicized in the original text, and that you weren't quite, you raised the question and we're curious about this. And again, it doesn't have to be conclusive, but I just thought it might be worth thinking about a little more. That you chose to kind of honor the author's original and continue to italicize the dogs' names. So I was kind of curious about that, maybe that might open up a whole other rich view.
It's a Hitchcockian MacGuffin.
Why do you mean by that, David?
It's a Hitchcock. It's one of those things that Hitchcock would throw in that would fascinate people, and there would be no explanation for it.
Okay.
In a way.
Okay.
But I want to say, since you pointed this out, and I'll just 1 minute. I want to say that I did not find that translation of the Pasolini excerpt to be adequate. And I think actually, you could even rework it on your own because it almost is incomprehensible. But I mean,
well, I don't know. I know Norman McAfee did some to English, but I don't know if he did that one.
Lorna, yes, he did.
That's the one that I believe that's the one I chose.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, when deciding to use an official translation, I actually did consider translating it myself so that it would be closer to what she seems to mean in the book, because the poem itself is political in nature, and I don't think that's what she means at all in her book. So that was something I did consider.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. The choice of Pasolini to me is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's very. I mean, and all these resonances too, because you have the queer identity, and also with David Bowie, the queer identity, and so it was really, and also even with Radio Futura, one of the band members was Scandinavian, which is, you know, kind of, it's just, there's just so much going in so many different directions. I just want to say one other thing too about your presentation. When you started it with that image of the Shibuya crossing, I was astonished. That was so beautiful. That image is just incredible. And it just, you know,
it reminds me of,
it's almost
yes.
like an icon for the novel, you know? It's really something. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it suggests all the crossings that were, you know, the crossings of translation, the crossings of life to death, the crossings from Denmark, you know, Spain to Denmark to Japan. It's very, very evocative. And it even suggested the film adaptation, which I thought it was very interesting that she opened with a film adaptation of Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is this like very atmospheric and ephemeral.
Beautiful movie.
It was very much a visual, yes. And of course, yes, and the style of writing of Marguerite Duras, which is also, you know, the influence is clear. The influence is clear in the, you know, some of the characters not even having names, the kind of austerity of the, and at the same time, the austerity of the writing with the charged emotion of what's happening. I think that's very what I recall of Duras' style. So I just wanted to throw out there I totally accept, you know, what David said about the Hitchcockian, you know, throw something in there. I guess I was led to think about interspecies relationships and human-animal relationships and you know, animal studies and humanities studies on the differentiation of animals, the astonishing cruelty for meat production that is just widely accepted without question, except in some circles of the way animals by the millions and millions are killed every day. And so I just wondered, you know, I just wondered if there was something about the relationships between the humans and the animals. If there, you know, could very well be just her having fun with it. But your questioning of it and your retaining the italics, you know, made me think a little more about the dogs, about the relationships between the dogs and the people, and then about animals. So yeah, that's just another, that was just another thing that I'm not saying you have to go into that or that it was missing. It just again belies the you know, the non-simplicity of the text you chose, you know. And so that was the only kind of question I had. I didn't have any other stumbling blocks. I thought it was a very smooth translation. I thought it works. So really my comment is more a comment unless you think the animal question is worth entertaining further. So I'll leave it at that, and also jump in and converse if that's okay when other people give their comments.
I actually hadn't thought about what you mentioned in terms of the cruelty towards animals, the relationship between animals and humans. In that sense, I hadn't thought about that, but it's something that I will actually think about. Yes, I will consider.
Yeah, and it might just, you know, it might not be worth, you know, like a, you know, it doesn't have to be included in your finished product here, but there's a whole realm of, and I'm not myself an, you know, animal studies scholar, but there's this whole realm of very exciting work going on in relation to the humanities that really points to, and it's philosophical. And so I, you know, and I think a lot of the themes in her work are philosophical also, and these intertextualities are philosophical also. So, so that's why I bring it up. So,
thank you,
job.
Maritza. Yeah, thank you, Maritza. Aurora,
Sure.
would you please present your insights to and questions and comments?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Lorna, I sent you the review thesis
Yes.
several days ago, and I congratulated you for your excellent work. This is a very hard book to translate, not only because some things that I would like to talk with you about now in our discussion, but because it's very hard to read. It's painful. I remember I cried when I was reading it. I was full of emotion when I was reading it, so I can only imagine what it is to translate. I have translated literary passages in which I have to stop and I feel physically ill and I have to stop. So I can imagine the emotional effort of translating this book, and I commend you on that because it reads very well, and I think that you were able to capture the author's style. I love how you work with the short sentences, with her constant kind of passing the fingers. I mean, and the way you translated gave it a very similar rhythm to the rhythm of the original text in Spanish. And I also understand that you're translating Peninsular Spanish, which of course is different from ours. And I think that you nailed very well the difference in our Spanishes, right? So I want to begin by congratulating you for this work, and I am very proud of you.
Thank you.
Yes, and of course you work with David, so you had the best advice you could have for these literary endeavors. So let me. I have as you saw in the document that I sent you. There are some things that I would like to discuss because these discussions are also our last chance to talk with you about translation problems, and also for the sake of the audience, because it's a great opportunity to hear talking about translation. Okay, and one thing in general that I would like to suggest, I agree with Maritza that today's presentation and the format and the visuals of this presentation are extraordinary. And I suggest, since this is already a PowerPoint, you have some images that could be transferable to your preface. I strongly suggest that you put them in the preface, because at times I always tell my students the preface should be self-standing. And remember that since in el repositorio, we don't put the translation, we only put the preface. If someone is going to read your preface, which I am sure they will, the preface should try to make up for the absence of the text. Okay, so those tables, those side by side, for me are fundamental. That is something that I work with my students in class. Let's make a table with the problems and see how we solve them. So I think it would be very didactic if you would include those visuals where they go in the preface. I strongly suggest that you do that to make it rounder, right? To make the preface more complete. Okay, so that's one. I'm going to first talk about the preface, about some issues of the preface that you already know. Not all of them. Some of the things are just comments. Some of them are just comments based on my enthusiasm from reading your translation. So not everything has to be discussed, but there's some things that I would like you to explain. And maybe with this explanation, you could reconsider adding them in your preface, okay? So in page 10 of your preface, you mention that, and this is just a very brief suggestion, but you mention that in the second paragraph, the first paragraph that begins, Ada engages in compulsive behaviors. At the end, which was written by Marguerite Duras. Ada writes poetry verses in a notebook she carries, right? And I think that maybe it's just worth mentioning, she writes the first poem that she writes has the title of the book. And maybe in a literary text, it is normally interesting to note those things, right? So maybe you could mention that poem contains the title of the text. It's like the poetic opening of the text. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. My second comment is on page 14 of your preface. Okay. Where you mentioned the unfamiliar vocabulary and the language that may be considered obscene in Puerto Rico. Maybe put an example. Maybe when you make those kind of affirmations, it's always good to include an example. Okay, and something that I do want you to explain. This is something that I need you to explain. Is your decision for the font?
Okay.
Because I don't agree with it, and I would like you. It makes it harder to read in the source text. It's very easy to distinguish the voice of the narrator from these other direct quotes. And in your translation, visually, I mean, and of course, I have older eyes and I use my reading glasses and all this, but it was not as clear. And I think that if at a more symbolic level, we are dealing with otherness and we're dealing with differences and with not being equal, things that are not equal, maybe you should reconsider going back to a font, to fonts that resemble more the source text, but you tell me.
All right. The reason I chose Calibri is actually because I have some visual impairments. I actually see double, the diplopia, and that is the font that is easiest for me to read. And I actually mentioned it to the professor, but I did say I can change it if necessary. And then we actually did discuss the text messages. And in the end, I think that it was the best decision to leave it as a sans serif font, because if you're going to write nowadays, if you're going to write a WhatsApp message or a text message and even emails, you will find sans serif. So I think that to fix that, so to speak, what would make sense is for the rest of the text to be in Times New Roman, which I would be perfectly fine with, and then leave the text messages and emails in a sans serif font. I think that can be done.
I think it resembles more reality, but what were we gonna say, David?
Actually, I'm I don't know why, but I love Calibri. And I do find it easier to read. And maybe it's because I've seen it so much and it's the default font for Word now. But having gone through fonts over the ages, now when I look at Times New Roman, I don't know. I can't
use the dot. You can use any other. But my question is, yes, we all like Calibri, and Calibri has many possibilities. But what I'm saying is that there's a clear distinction, and it has to do with the serif. It has to do. So it could be the dot. It could be. I mean, it could be any. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that for me it was harder, especially when these direct discourses are inserted in a paragraph. it was harder for me to see where one thing began and when the other began. Also with the use of, and I also have a question about the use of orthotypographic marks.
Oh, yes.
There are in page 9 of your translation. Just check it. I marked it, but there are. She doesn't use question marks, and you put question marks, and so just double check that, or did you do that on purpose?
I did not do it on,
Okay.
well, kind of on purpose, in the sense that when I was reading it, I was actually confused at different points. And I initially thought, oh, I should put something here that eliminates that confusion. But I actually do agree that they should not be there, because in her style, in her narrative style, they're not there. So yes.
Yeah, and especially because you do mention at some point, this is a stream of consciousness.
Yes.
So the stream of consciousness will not always be orthotypographically correct.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the flatness and the confusion could be an important part of what's being communicated.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I have
disorientation or flatness might actually be what's attempted to what's being conveyed.
I have a quick question too. I was just looking at the source text, and it's not Times New Roman that's used, but I can't identify that font. I like that font. I like it because it's cleaner than Times New Roman. So it's kind of an intermediary between Calibri and Times New Roman. If you can find out what font that is, I would use it.
I do have an idea, because my father he's a graphic artist.
Yeah.
And he told me that it's probably Garamond. He isn't entirely sure, but
I don't think so. I think it's even cleaner than Garamond, but whatever it is.
But it's similar too.
Okay, and then use Garamond because I don't know. I just don't like Times New Roman. That's but that was Aurora. Sorry, that was a really good point. That whatever typographical weirdness exists in the source text should try, Lorna should try to convey that in her translation.
And
that's all I have to say.
Is Times New Roman not considered standard?
It's not. The thing is that if you start immediately typing in Word, I mean, I understand that Calibri now is the default font for Word, and I use it whenever. I mean, as a professional translator, when I'm editing work, it almost always comes to me in Calibri, and I use Calibri all the time. So I think it's kind of the default now. And I like it, but to each their own.
Yeah. Okay. So give a thought to that that I suggested. I would like you to especially congratulate you for your decision with Siempre Vivas. I love what you did. I simply loved it. And it's such a powerful word, and it's such a powerful name for a flower in Spanish. And in the context of this story, that the way you solved it is brilliant. I have nothing else to say. I'm going to use that as an example for my classes, for my literary translation, because sometimes younger translators are afraid to intervene in the text. Sometimes we may have the erroneous belief that you have to keep as close to the source text, and that you cannot add or eliminate anything. And that is an addition that is very poetic, that is beautifully symbolic, and that you solved it grammatically perfectly. So I wanted to say that, and the way that you explain it in the preface, and I like very much, and that's why I suggest that you insert some of the visuals of your presentation in the preface, because you do something very well also in the preface, which is to show the examples. And I'm tired of telling students, you need to put the examples in the preface. Otherwise, without the source text and without the translation, the reader of the preface is going to be lost. So that, what you did, not only how you solved it in the text, but the way you explained it in the preface is fantastic. So I wanted to make that chihi-chiha here. And with the Pasolini quote, I again, with literary text, there are better or more prestigious translators, but there's not an official translation as you will find in a legal text or in a scientific text, and even then. So I don't see why you cannot translate Pasolini's quote and just translate it, okay? Because as David said, I'm not crazy about the translation, that you had to choose, maybe because you thought that you had to choose an already published translation. It's not always the case, and much less in literary text. Literary text, as we know, I mean, the beauty of literature is that it has a malleability to it, right? The words are more malleable than, let's say, in a scientific text or in a jurisprudence text. And then, so I say, go for your translation of Pasolini.
If you do that, you should mention it in the preface as to why you decided to translate it on your own.
Yes.
You could just say that because the published translations were defective. I mean,
well, or if you don't want to be, you can say they didn't.
They are.
You can say that they didn't adjust to the meaning that you understand that the author is trying to convey, and that way you're so polite and you will not burn bridges. So anyway. But one thing that I do want to say to finish my comments on the preface is that, and this has to do also with the translation. I do not like, and I said it in my comments, I do not like footnotes, translator notes in a literary text that are not totalmente imprescindibles. And the footnotes that you chose to include in the text are totally unnecessary. I don't agree with the one of the 11, 12 hours. It seems a little bit show-offish. And 11, 12 hours in a flight to Japan, who knows? I mean, this is very subjective. She doesn't even know what's going on, you know? So instead of saying, I did the math and it takes 12, just eliminate that. And then for the quotes from the Bible, say it in the preface. I quoted this Bible, and again, the beautiful tablita that you put in your presentation, use that. And I would eliminate the footnotes from the text. I don't think it's a good practice in literary translation. Okay, so move them to the preface just because they're good and they're important, but just move them to the preface and leave the text. Let the text talk by itself. Okay. And my last comment is that
siempre vivas, the public wants to know what siempre vivas are, and I actually had a comment about that too, but Lorna, could you tell us what the translation of siempre vivas is in English?
Yes. The siempre vivas in English are called statis flowers. With status. I'm sorry about the pronunciation. And obviously they do not mean the same thing as in Spanish. Yes. So what I did, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I don't, and you know, the thing is that if people were to see them, they're automatically recognizable, but it's the name that you know, that really kind of flips people out. What, statage? Or status? Is it status or statage?
You're muted.
Oh, I am?
No, Professor Stanchich.
Maritza, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I always say status, and because of the English, I recognized immediately. I could envision the flower immediately because it's so widely used when you buy flowers and flower bouquets. And I did think of the English pronunciation, the meaning of the pronunciation, not as the flower spelled S-T, you know,
S-T-A-T-I-C-E.
But as in status, as in status, as in
Yes.
status,
Yes.
alive or dead, you know. So I did actually think of the meaning of the English pronunciation. But I also
something
agree,
also, you know,
siempre viva, powerful to retain.
Yeah, and the one thing that I wanted to say about the siempre vivas, you know, yeah, they're always alive, but in a sense, they're always dead.
Yeah,
you know, so
exactly. They're dry.
And so I think
the
English actually is very interesting because if you remove the E, it becomes static. You know,
Yes.
and they are static. They're completely static flowers.
They're like dried flowers. Yeah, they're like dried flowers.
They're almost like dried flowers. So I think the English is very, very interesting. And the idea of static, which is neutral, you know, could be alive or could be dead, is also very interesting. So I think the siempre vivas is really important.
Great.
But I think that, you know, you could even add some more poetry in there, you know, inserting something that she wouldn't say, but, you know, status or static, you know, I mean, somehow, you know, but I think it would be clear enough just if you use the English once, you know, status, it's really weird. It's very, very weird and very interesting. It's one of those, you know, resonating metaphors. But anyway, I'm sorry, Aurora, I went off on a tangent. I'm sorry.
In terms of, I'm sorry, in terms of the siempre vivas, I really wanted to keep the Spanish meaning because we're talking about death in general and about how Dennis felt. And that also has to do with the name Soco. Soco can mean someone who's missing a limb or, I'm sorry, an arm or both arms. And it can also mean left-handed. And he always felt that he was missing something. He is someone, later in the novel, you find out that he was abandoned by his parents. He was not wanted. And that's why siempre vivas. In Spanish, she says, siempre vivas, por toda la vida que le faltaba, por eso me compraba siempre vivas. So I translated it as siempre vivas, everlastingly alive, stasis flowers, everlastingly alive, for all the life that he was missing. I think I sang it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I love
Fantastic.
that. You know, all books have like the line, you know, that when you think about them many, many years after, you say, oh, that's the line from that book, you know, and I think that's the line, at least in your translation. You'll have to translate the rest of the novel to see if there's another the line. And lastly, and I think that with this comment, I'm pretty much done because the things that we discussed for the preface apply to the translation. I need a conclusion in the preface. It's just, you just stopped there. And I was like, oh, I want to read more. So just wrap it. Maybe now with a few new things that you're going to add, just a one or two sentences, just wrap it. Okay. Because it looks much better. And it looks more finished, okay? But again, it was delightful, and this conversation has been delightful too. I I have to say I have enjoyed it very, very much. And again, I congratulate you for this work, and I am done with my comments.
Okay. I have a question, because this is something that Lorna and I discussed, and I as a translation, and I'm still not maybe entirely satisfied, and I'm not sure how Lorna feels, but the translation of kiosco as newsstand, and the only reason is that, I know these kioscos in Spain. There was one, there's always one in any apartment complex, they're always out there, and kiosk doesn't work in English. So, and so going back in time, there was always a newsstand. Of course, newsstands don't exist anymore. So, but I think, Lorna, you had some issues with that, maybe, if I'm not incorrect.
Well, I did have questions, especially because of the description she gives of the kiosco.
Yes.
So newsstand did not feel enough at the beginning, but I do have to concede that newsstand is the word that is used in English, and some of the things that she mentions that her father does in the kiosco can also be done from a newsstand.
Yeah.
So I thought, yes, that is the best option.
Yeah. Well, no two languages ever align. So, especially with all the cultural trappings that go along with any given word. But I just wanted to ask Aurora, for example, did you feel that was an adequate translation, newsstand?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think it was. I could see it clearly.
And Maritza?
Yeah.
It made me visualize it much more exactly. I mean, they are still alive in like the subway stations in New York City.
New York City, that's exactly.
Yeah.
For me, kiosco worked as a general word, but newsstand made me visualize exactly what I think was what she was getting at. And
Yeah.
those newsstands sell,
Everything.
Food. They sell flowers. And they're positioned in places where many people are walking by, and they even have a particular shape. I mean, everything about them is very particular. Whereas a kiosk, and I think this might even have to do a little bit with being in Puerto Rico, where the Spanish influences the English in Puerto Rico. And so kiosk for me in English in Puerto Rico, works for almost any kind of kiosk.
Yeah, but piñones.
Like piñones or a tourism information booth, in Old San Juan, or whereas a newsstand was very specific. I immediately had a visual of it, and so I do think it worked.
Okay. All right. Were there any other comments or questions? Okay, then what we'll do now is Lorna will be escorted out of the virtual room, and Maritza, we'll be back, by the way, public. Dear public, we'll be back. Don't go away. There's more. But we're going to be signing off very briefly. And so Lorna, if you don't mind, Luis will escort you out. I'm speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for everyone else as well. And we think that you did a superb job, and that this work merits sobresaliente, of course, as a grade. But my suggestion is that maybe you contact Elisa Levi and say, look, I have this already. Are you interested in maybe me doing some more?
Should.
Okay. And I will think about in the future seeing that version by Lorna Pagán Mattos in English of Why Cities Weep. So congratulations. Muchas felicidades.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Excellent work.
Thank you. I'm very honored. Thank you all for your for your time, for your guidance. I am very, very grateful, and I'm so grateful to PGT for allowing me to get to this point, and for teaching me all that I know. And this has been an amazing experience, and I'm really happy right now. So thank you so much.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, we'd like to say goodbye to everyone now, and thank you for tuning in. I guess that's it.